On today's episode, we have Nicole Hermes and Sean Hamman. You guys, welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Herman.
Thanks, Hamman.
So, guys, tell me about what it is you do.
Okay, so I'll take this one to start, right?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, so we are running a ceremonial practice with Iboga and Kambo medicines. And we are practicing under the name of still nothingness. So what that means is that our practice takes on silence as a major component of our ceremonies. And we work with these beautiful medicines for self-inquiry as a pathway into direct experience of being present in our bodies. So yeah, a lot of our ceremonial practice is focused on grounding people into their bodies, actually. And this practice has been running, well, I joined in 2017, but Sean here, Sean established this in 2004 with his ayahuasca practice, and then with Iboga in 2007. So yeah, we've been running this prayer wheel for quite some time and working with a lot of people all over the world and meeting a lot of different people from many different backgrounds and pathways of spirituality who all have this way to meet in the simplicity of presence and ultimately a meeting with themselves and the one self. So this is our practice.
Pretty much well. Just to share a little bit how it first came about, was that in my 20s, I was really into recreational substances. And then in my early 30s, I had an experience with MDMA that gave me a lasting awakening into the experience of the transcendental. So for me, my experience was that I was already practicing with ayahuasca in the Santa Daime tradition. And then when I had this experience of the transcendental, then I realized that it was possible to introduce other people to the transcendental through the plants and essentially through the empty silence. So after practicing with the medicines, working with songs and music, it was quite a shift to move into the silence and to start teaching the transcendental through the silence, the transcendental through meeting the silence through the plants. And so I found that it was perfectly possible to introduce people to the transcendental through the practice of still nothingness. And so we've been facilitating still nothingness through ayahuasca and witnessing the awakenings that have happened through ayahuasca, and also the awakenings that have been happening through the Kambo, and most profoundly, out of all the medicines, has been Iboga for introducing people to the lasting experience of living the transcendental. And so currently here in South Africa, we've arrived here after being in Europe. I've been away from South Africa for 23 years and recently come back in 2018. And for now, we're just facilitating Kambo and Iboga, but ayahuasca will probably also be on the menu again at some point.
What caused the shift from ayahuasca to Iboga?
Yeah, so that was kind of interesting because when I was in the ayahuasca, I was so focused on my pathway and was so sure that the ayahuasca was providing the way through. But then what I started to find was that in my St. Daime church, I was surrounded with people who'd been doing the practice for 15, 20 years. And a lot of the egoic issues that they'd started out with were still in place. And then when I started to look at my own process, I started to realize that a lot of the difficulties were in fact still here. They'd been covered over by a spiritual ego, but essentially a lot of the same topics were still here. And so then when I started to practice with Iboga, then the Iboga showed me on no uncertain terms that my journey here wasn't about working with a group, about working with a collective. It was about coming to myself. And so then when I inquired of the Daime, and I said to the Daime, you know, what's going on? Why is it that we're coming to church and that everybody's still stuck in these same stories and not moving through? And then the snake said to me, oh, well, the thing is, you're following a doctrine, and I'm your teacher. So then it became clear to me, that I actually had to change the way that I was working with ayahuasca. So that was when we started to break away from the church and develop our own practice. And we found that when we were in the church, we would have about 4 hours of singing and sometimes dancing, and then about 40 minutes in the middle where we would have silence. And so for me, that silence was the most profound. So myself and another medicine man who I met in the St. Daime, his name is Steve Dyer, he and I decided to set up a practice called World Bridges. And so we broke away from the St. Daime and we started this practice. And so in the beginning, it was more about us developing this practice, whilst also supporting the Bwiti, who were in France at that time. And then we were hosting them in England, whilst still working with the ayahuasca. And then we started to make the transition over from the ayahuasca into the Iboga. And one of the main reasons for us was that in those days in England, there weren't that many people working with ayahuasca in about 2003. So, so what we used to find is that when people would come and sit with us, that through the ayahuasca, it was much harder to introduce people to the transcendental because there's so much distraction. People are having their kundalinis awakened. There's a lot of crown chakra work, so people are a lot more easily distracted. And there's also a lot more space for the complications to happen within the works. But essentially, we found that the people who were most attracted to our works were people who'd already done quite a lot of work on themselves. A lot of meditators, people who are already touching the silence. So we were kind of really touching more of a select group of people. And a lot of other people were rather choosing to go and practice with people where they would have music and singing. So in the beginning, it's kind of more select around the ayahuasca, and then it became a natural journey of moving over to the wood. Because then I started to host Iboga in France, and up until then I'd been going to France and doing a lot of my Iboga work in France, and then started to host the French chapter in England. And then this was part of my apprenticeship that I served. So originally I met the wood in France, and that was in about 2004. And then it was a space from 2004 to 2007 I was serving a traditional apprenticeship along with a French doctor and a Gabonese shaman outside Montpellier in France. So it was much more traditional in the beginning, up until 2007. And then our French chapter had some legal difficulties for the authorities in France, and their work had to shut down. And then in 2008, myself and Steve got really clear indicators from Spirit that it was time to start facilitating Iboga. And so, although we'd been working in the traditional Bwiti way, it was a really smooth transition to introduce people to Bwiti. And the Iboga was only too happy to step into practice with us. And as it said to us, the genie is out of the bottle.
What are the Bwiti, or who are they?
Would you like to answer?
Yeah. Okay. So Bwiti, it's often thought by many people that Bwiti is a tribe, but actually this is not the case. Bwiti is a spiritual practice that's practiced by a number of different peoples and tribal villages and ethnic groups around the Congo basin. So Bwiti is the consciousness and the intelligence of the plant medicine Iboga. A big part of practicing Bwiti is considered that at some stage you will eat the sacrament, the sacred wood, which is the Iboga tabernantha. And it may be in huge amounts at some stage in your initiations, or it may be in smaller amounts, or it may be that it's a part of a rite with music or particular dances. So Bwiti is in a way, there are expressions of Bwiti that have evolved through the experience of all of these different communities. And so this intelligence, which is accessed through eating Iboga, basically. And so in that sense, it's an animist presence to be able to experience connectedness with ourselves, our ancestors. So in the ceremonial process, when there's, and through that journey, our ancestors, and ultimately into a place of an undivided state of being, and sometimes can be experienced as a state of emptiness. And in our living state, this experience of Bwiti is this intelligence that speaks to us through our life experience, that can be experienced through connection, synchronicity, trust, love, an awake presence that's so alive through the circumstances of our day-to-day living, that we experience life as a force, a conscious force. So this is how I speak about Bwiti. And how about you, Sean? How do you experience Bwiti?
Yeah, so Bwiti, as Nicole said, is very animist, and animist is really about noticing the God presence that's around us, that's in nature. So a lot of pathways are pointing to God within us, and a lot of psychedelics are known as entheogens, and it's the call to look within. But with Bwiti, it's animist, so it's about realizing God as being all around us, as this divine self that is within us, but actually being experienced as being all around us. and living, aware of us. As we are aware of it, it is aware of us. And Bwiti is essentially, as well as being this being who appears to us in different ways, but often he appears as like a big black Jesus with a Zen sense of humor. And usually he comes for us. It's not so much like we go looking for this person, but much more rather life and circumstances present us with the opportunity where we're facing the opportunity to meet this being. And this being has been hidden for a very long time and practiced in secret in Central Africa. So it's a bit different from the ayahuasca, in which the ayahuasca has this long tradition of thousands of years where the medicine's being dispersed around the continent and people have been practicing with it in different ways. But in Bwiti, it's been really hidden. And the only people who've been practicing with it, who've had the right to practice with it, have been the pygmies, and at a later stage, the Bantu tribes who came through the area. But in the early mid-90s, that all changed, because in the early mid-90s, the Bwiti spoke to the pygmies and said, okay, now it's time to tell the Bantu people that they have to start teaching the rights to white people, to spread the message of Bwiti around the world, to share the roots of Bwiti. And so it was from that time, early mid-90s, that suddenly it became available to the West. So in many ways, this medicine is in its infancy, but it's really decided now that it's time for us to share Bwiti.
When you say in its infancy, you mean in terms of it being experienced by the wider collective, but in actual fact, it isn't. It has been practiced for hundreds and hundreds of generations.
Yeah.
Or hundreds of generations.
But for us in the West, it's still quite a new thing, and Bwiti in Gabon is considered a death cult. Because when people come home to Bwiti, in many ways, we're coming home to the empty nothingness. And people speak about this experience in different traditions with different languages. But Bwiti is kind of much more about the nothingness and in the nothingness coming home to our death and making peace with death. And not just making peace with death, making friends with death. And so in many ways, Bwiti is almost considered like an angel of death, because it exists out of time. It's grounding into the unseen. We can't see it with these eyes, but it's much more something we're living. And it knows the past, it knows the future, and it meets us here in the now.
Is there any way to get in contact with or to reap some of the benefits of Iboga without actually coming into physical contact with it?
Yes, for most certainly. So what we've been doing for some time is we do a consultation, and then essentially the spirit of the plant speaks through us, and then we speak to you or we speak to somebody else, and whoever it is that's asking, and we provide an introduction to the spirit being. And then the spirit being speaks the voice of how it manifests for us in our life, how it speaks to us before it's even time to eat the wood. And so we do the consultation, the being speaks through us, steps into you, and then when we finish off the conversation, the two of you have begun your journey. And you step off And now in your life, you start to meet this being through the subtlety, through your experience, without microdosing, without having to eat it, but much more rather meeting it through direct experience. So some of my companions also facilitate Iboga. They're really into microdosing and giving people the medicine beforehand. But for me, I prefer to just speak about it, to introduce people to its presence, how it's present for us through our life, and then step away and allow this process to unfold. And then this being comes to you, it meets you through your life, it starts to introduce you to where your work is, and at the same time, you start to get a sense of what you're letting go into. And if it is, perhaps you're dealing with a terminal illness and you're not able to make the final destination of meeting the Word, then the Word, in its deep compassion, will facilitate the kind of healing and awakening in your life that will enable you to go through the process that you would have needed to go through in death. And we've seen this happen for many people who have had consultations with us over the years, have initiated the process, gone through a kind of a death, come out the other side into the second part. So this has been known to happen. And in Gabon, it's also known that you can go and meet Bwiti without eating Iboga.
There's the way that happens often for people who've eaten the wood, that they can go and spend time in a space where people are connecting with themselves, maybe it's through conversation, a quality conversation, and sometimes it's through the fact that somebody is also in a medicine ceremony, in another space, in another environment, and then the person who is meeting the Bwiti actually is meeting it through that person who's come for the ceremony and eaten the wood, and their inner eye or their inner knowing, their heart awareness, connects with the spirit of Iboga, with the spirit of the wood, and experiences it in a visionary way or through a flash of insight, or grounded peace and clarity. And it's often come back to us that that somebody at ceremony has had someone come up to them and said, who was that black woman or black man who was with you in spirit form through the whole ceremony? They were wearing ceremonial dress. They also turned up. They actually came and had a conversation with me. We worked through a few things, and then they come and they speak to the person. They said, and then they find out, oh, you've been working with Iboga. Okay, and then it starts to open up that connection, as they also know this, maybe from past life or a calling. And so this is also a way people meet the spirit of Iboga.
In previous podcasts, there's been a lot of discussion about ayahuasca and the mistreatment of ayahuasca and the dangers associated with that. What are some dangers associated with Iboga?
It's such a good question. Yeah, I think there can be, when you're working in this arena with plant medicines, and as you have, Sean, and to some extent I have over the last 5 or 6 years, you do hear about all kinds of things that happen. And there is the obvious one, overdosing, giving somebody too much. And this can be a risk for somebody who is going into a space where, usually it's in a more traditional setting where the amounts that is eaten is much higher by the locals, and then somebody from somewhere else, some non-Central African person, some white person, some European person, some Asian person goes over, and they might have a vulnerability, and it's not clearly communicated, and then there's the risk of, you know, dying in ceremony, eating too much and going so deep that you can't come back, because you are going into a death state. And they're always checking. Usually, if you're eating huge quantities of wood, there should be, and there usually is somebody in that space that should be asking you in French, usually in French, what did you see? How far are you going? What are you seeing on the way? Because if you're reporting certain landmarks in your death state that may indicate that you're going too far, then they know, oh, we've got to bring this person back. But I think communication is a big issue going into Gabon, and that is something that can happen. And then then on the other hand, there can be the risk of people not knowing, the facilitator not understanding how to bring people back into their bodies, and that happens quite often in the clinical settings. I'll leave it there, and you can open that one up a bit more.
So I feel that when people are drinking ayahuasca, you know, sometimes it's like some people can be like a seesaw, and if they've got any schizophrenia or psychotic things in their genetic line, then quite often the medicine can tip them over their edge, and then they can come into difficulty. But when it comes to the wood, everybody has a different sensitivity, and some people are very, very, very sensitive and don't need to eat much wood, and a little bit of wood can mean quite a big death for them already, without having to do a flood dose and put their body under a huge amount of duress. So in Gabon, people are quite scared about white people coming over to initiate, because they reckon that the statistic in Gabon is 1 in 300 don't make the journey. And so that's quite a big statistic, 1 in 300. But in Africa, if somebody passes on a ceremony, there's less issue around that person who's passed. They kind of consider it part of the journey, part of the risks that you know you have to take, because you have a calling to connect with this medicine, and you're coming to give yourself to the medicine. And if it chooses to take you, well, that's part of the journey. But in Africa, people are not using so many Western medicines or antibiotics and vaccines. And so in Africa, a lot of Africans' bodies are much stronger than the white people, and they're able to ingest and channel much larger and stronger amounts of medicine. And then the concerns are when white people come along and then they push for the same doses that they've been giving the local people. And then people have a huge dose, go so far deep into the death, so deep into the light, that they can't find their way back to their bodies. And so there is a danger of this happening. And myself, our apprentice in Ireland, had this happen for her. She'd been hosting our work for some years, and the way that we practice is we do a step-by-step dose, because allowing the fact that everybody is so sensitive, that for some people a little bit is a huge dose, and for other people they need a bit more. So that's why we do the step-by-step dose. in Gabon, they tend to give you all of it in one go. They want you to consume about 30 spoons in one go. But for us, we find that when we step people in slowly, then typically they'll probably go in about 8 grams. And that's a step-by-step dose. So step by step, we're finding out as we go in how sensitive they are, how they're channeling their energy through their bodies. And then we find that this is really safe. But for our friend in Ireland, when she went and did the work with us, after about the third or fourth of that her death was happening. So she revealed a very deep sensitivity. And then when she felt the calling to go to Gabon to initiate, because many people come, they meet the word and suddenly they're like, oh, this is amazing. I want to go to Gabon and initiate. And then they go off. And they're so feeling the call for this medicine. They believe they have to chase after to receive this gift that in fact they've already received. And then they go to Gabon and she went and sat with a medicine man who'd come recommended through the community. She went out with a nurse. And then when she told the medicine man, oh, look, I've got a sensitivity. I've worked with my teacher in Ireland. It revealed the sensitivity. He said, oh, I'll be the one who decides that. And then he went and proceeded to give her a huge dose about 3 hours into the ceremony. And so that's one of the deaths that has happened that I'm aware of. So I am aware that it happens, and I discourage people from going to Gabon because I feel in many ways I've been given the gift to be able to share with people outside of Gabon, outside of Africa.
What's the difference between... Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was just going to finish up on the question. So in terms of this practice in a clinical setting or in less traditional structures of ceremony, there's a death part. In every ceremony, there is a death part. And there's also necessarily a rebirth part. And this is not just a figure of speech, it's a transitional process where your awareness is opening up into a death state, and your aware of all of your body isolated within you over a lifetime. Even lifetimes, your attachments become extremely clear in this death state, and there is like a change in the body that happens. You know, you become very heavy. You don't feel like moving much. You're very uncoordinated. So the body's there, and you can move it, but it's a heavy, effort-filled activity a lot of the time, moving the body in the death state. So often people think that, you know, they eat, that the medicine is being eaten, and then when the medicine wears off, that's it, you're back in your body. But there's actually a crucial part of initiating the charge of bringing the body back. And this rebirth part of the ceremony is so crucial, but it often gets missed out in clinical settings. And over our time with our practice, we hear from people that have had this experience of still connected with their expanded bodies, with lots of awareness of these thought forms and a lot of attachments. And they don't know why there isn't this groundedness that often comes with, which is often said to come with doing this groundedness in your body. Back in and reconnected up.
Yeah, they haven't done the rebirth yet. And so it's really easy to kill people and to take them into hell. But it takes a shaman to take people into hell and then bring them back again, to birth them back into their bodies. So here in South Africa, we have a very strong entrepreneurial spirit, and a lot of people don't like to follow traditions. They like to find their own way. But in this particular medicine, it's definitely worthwhile following the Bwiti pathway, because the Bwiti pathway is all about this journey into death, making the transition, and then coming back to the body. So the teachings are, yes, you're acquiring this practice of mindfulness in the death state, and now you're having to bring this quality of mindfulness into the life state. And this is something that's missed, that's often missed with the wood, because people think, oh, I'm going to do a blood dose, they have this experience, and then they're left in the zombie land. And they don't realize that this is just part of the journey, that they need somebody who's able to take them through the journey and bring them out the other side.
Yeah, so some of the risks can be that people still feel that they're very overly sensitive to thoughts, that they can't seem to activate their body at their will, that they feel also heavy and lethargic. It might take them weeks and weeks to start regaining their energy again. And that in some ways they're still facing some of those voices of their suffering that were around before, because they're still connected and being able to see the thoughts and feel the effect in their body. And they're, and not feeling so grounded in being able to not feeling so grounded. Yeah, I think we've covered it. So actually, this is like a really big part of being able to transition in our life through different phases and let go of who we were and some of the behaviors of our past as well.
Yeah, so we have examples of really accomplished meditators who've gone or done the medicine, and then months later we've seen them and they're still wandering around in the Bardo. And then we've consulted with them, and then it's turned out that they didn't do a rebirth, and now they're still stuck in this in-between space. And then we've also heard of people within the Bwiti even, who run sessions for people where they just do one night. So they do one night and then send everybody home and they're still dead. And then we hear from other people who've done the works for them, and their wives come to us and they say, I don't understand this medicine. You know, he was fine before he went. Yeah, sure enough, he was going through some difficulties, but he's a shadow of his former self. And instead, he should be standing in his power. What's going on? And then it's bringing a lot of not good reflection on this medicine. And it's a common thing that happens. People just take people into the Bardo, give them the experience, and then it's left them hanging in the air. And Bwiti is so much about you coming in, you're having to do this journey. It's initiation onto the path. So Bwiti is really considered the pathway. And in a lot of ways, it's very much like Zen. You know, it's the road. And so now it's initiation onto the pathway. You go through this death, you come out the other side, and now this being who's initiated you into mindfulness in your death state is now stepping into life with you. And these teachings that it's been teaching you in death are now the teachings that it's teaching you in your life. And you're grounding them through your life practice. And this is all part of doing the fullness of the death, so that you can connect with yourself on a deeper level, let go of the shadows, come home to the body, and then begin the work that we've come here to do.
What's the difference between Iboga and Ibogaine?
Yeah, so Ibogaine is an extraction of Iboga, and there's specific alkaloids which have been extracted, which are particularly suited to provide the experience of being an addiction interrupter. And so a lot of people choose to use Ibogaine over Iboga because it just cuts through to breaking the addiction. But unfortunately, it's not all of the alkaloids, so that when people have the Iboga, at least the Ibogaine, a lot of the focus is on the journey itself. What kind of visions you had, whether you felt sick, whether you threw up. A lot of the focus is on the journey itself. Iboga is less about what's happening in the journey, because it's a kind of recognition that it's restructuring your DNA, and what we're experiencing is just peripheral. It's on the surface. And the depth of the work, that's what happens afterwards. So it's a little bit different. So where people are doing Ibogaine, and then it's kind of much more like the focus is on a specific job in breaking that addiction. And then afterwards, people can feel a bit of presence for them for a little while, but then the dream starts to come back in again. And a lot of the vision and insight that they've received is slow to ground itself into their lives. But with Iboga, it's the other way around. You come in, you have this deep work, it's a grounding into the unseen. You can't really see what's happening. And then you step into your life, and now it starts to happen.
Can people who take Ibogaine suffer the same disconnection problems as people who take Iboga? So the same lack of groundedness that you mentioned earlier, of not being rebirthed.
I'm not sure if I understand that question.
So people who take Ibogaine, can they struggle with the same?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so that's very much a common thread that happens. We meet a lot of people who've done Ibogaine. It's provided something special, but it hasn't provided the grounding into their life. But it's provided some really strong pointers, and it's provided some good life changes. But a lot of the time, Ibogaine is pointing in the direction to the Iboga. So we often find people have met the Ibogaine, and they've kind of met the Iboga now in a way too, because there is that sense of it, that shadow of it in there. And so often people do the Ibogaine, kind of leads them a little bit uncertain as to what was that all about. And I can feel that was an amazing gift, but I'm not quite sure what it means yet. Mm-hmm. And I know there's some meaning in it, but I can't quite see it. And then they come and then they meet the Iboga. And now suddenly what they've experienced in the Ibogaine is in context.
Where does Kambo fall into the picture?
Yeah. So in our practice, we work with Kambo pretty extensively. It has such a valuable gift for people in their bodies, in bringing them also into their body mind and allowing them to cleanse physically years and years of residual buildup of toxins, stress, psycho thoughts and emotions that build up as physical ailments in the body. And so when people are coming and they're looking for grounding to be able to examine themselves, examine their life, there's often so much mental story that comes with that the Kambo also, just like the Iboga, is facilitating a process of stripping back these obstructions and distractions. And through the Iboga, it's working with the mental body and looking at thoughts. and the residue of out so people can feel more again in their body. So after the preparation for the Iboga, and in that sense, there's so many reasons for that as well.
So in Gabon, if we were doing a traditional ceremony, then there would be a bit of purification that would happen before. And that often entails a couple of days before drinking this kind of dark stuff that tastes absolutely foul and then makes you throw up and have diarrhea. And it's horrible. And so everybody has to go through this little purification ritual. And then when they come, they have to arrive with an empty stomach and then drink 3 liters of water and then make themselves throw up. And so it's quite a strong little process. And then by the time they're stepping into the wood, they're pretty shaken and stirred already. And you know, it's not so easy. It's not an easy, it's an ordeal work. So what we found is that working with the frog really provides this purification beforehand. It's an intelligent being. It's connected with us. It's connected with the Bwiti. Bwiti and it are big buddies. And the two of them are preparing our initiate for the journey. We're getting to exorcise our initiates before they come in, because the other aspect that's really good with the frog is that it exercises any entities that people happen to be carrying. So if they've been carrying big addictions to substances in the past, then a lot of the entities that could create difficulty within the work are exercised beforehand. So this is useful if people have been drinking a lot of coffee, if they've been attached to their cigarettes and their nicotine. The Kambo provides a really good addiction interrupter. So as well as exercising out a lot of the difficult things, it's providing this physical purification, and we're also getting to see how strong our clients are, how present they are when they're going through ordeal medicine, how they're able to hold space for themselves. And so we find it's exceptionally useful. And then also at this time now, where a lot of people have been getting vaccinated, it's been a more important time now to discover for ourselves how strong people are in their bodies, whether they've got any sensitivities, and so the frog provides us the space to be able to have a look in the window and to see who's coming, what are they bringing in with them, and the frog clears a lot out. And so then by the time they come, they're ready. They're not in a state of fear, they're just present. They've connected with the other people who are coming to journey with them already, and they've had a little mini death, and now they're ready.
Are there any other forms of spirituality or philosophies that really resonate with you guys and with your practice?
In the beginning, when we used to run our practice, we used to suggest to people when they first came to work with us that they read Eckhart Tolle's book first, the one called A New Earth. And A New Earth is a really great read for people who are beginners, because it's like the awakening manual for the layman. And then when you read this book, you get really introduced in a beautiful way to your ego and your pain body, and provides you this whole language of awakening. And then when people come in to work with us, then the language tends to be more of emptiness. So in the early days when people came, they would do Eckhart Tolle on the way in, and it would be a new earth. And then they pop out the other side. And then quite often we would refer them to Adyashanti's work. And here's another book called The End of Your World. So it's almost like a little Bwiti joke in a way. You know, here we are, oh, it's a new earth. And then we step into our awakening. And now in a lot of ways, those stories that we thought it was about, they're all dissolving. And now we're becoming much more in awareness of what's actually happening. So a little bit of Eckhart Tolle's nice in a way in, but once you're in, then emptiness. I'm a really big fan of Osho. I found Osho's work has also been a huge, it's absolutely fantastic. He really promotes freedom. And Bwiti is all about being free.
Yeah, I also find that there are some embodied practices that resonate with this process. And that the sleep practices, such as yoga nidra, have spoken up for me as a valuable practice for entering that liminal space where you're experiencing the layers of your sensory body and then your perceptions, and you're starting to go into a deeper state of relaxation where you're starting to become aware of your expanded bodies. And in that state, it becomes possible to experience yourself from an inclusive and non-judgmental place of observation. And it's so valuable, and anyone can access it. And, you know, sleep is considered so close to death, but there are different ways to sleep, different layers to sleep. And so, yeah, the more consciousness we can bring into our sleeping process, the more capacity we have to be present through different states of being. Especially, you know, I think as well, coming into contact with uncomfortable feelings as well, and learning how to master some kind of mindfulness practice. And again, the key to this is the quality of spaciousness and relaxation. And they're quite simple things to have, to speak about, but yet for a lot of people in day-to-day life, feeling relaxed isn't something everyone can claim to know very well, with the momentum of day-to-day life and the responsibilities. So relaxation practices and acceptance practices.
Vipassana. So the language with Vipassana is also very similar to the language. It's very much about coming home to equanimity. So a lot of practitioners who go and do Vipassana get introduced to Goenka. And Goenka, in all his recordings, is always speaking about equanimity. And that's exactly what's going on here. Everybody is coming into equanimity. And so, yeah, we get a lot of Vipassana practitioners who come and sit with us. A lot of meditators come. And also a lot of Buddhists.
Yeah, I think, but now, you know, the connection to qualities, spiritual pathways and qualities has become also very grounded through nature for many people. So I would say a lot of the people who are coming to this work, such as myself, we stepped in through a love of plants and walking in nature, and experience some form of awakening or connection to a bigger self through these natural environments, sometimes by taking mushrooms or plants, and sometimes without anything at all. So I think that this is a very important part of the life journey, being able to connect and ground with our environment in some way, shape, or form. And it doesn't have to be always the organic, natural environment. You know, I also know people who come to this work who've only ever been able to stay in cities and have in fact connected with the animist quality of the city and the built environment and the beauty and the devastation of concrete and cracks and weeds and the way water drips through or moves through canals in these environments, and finding that in fact there is a huge amount of spirit all around us. So I find that more people are listening to their inner voice and them being able to experience the mythical nature, I guess you could call it, the mythical nature of their existence. So I think this is something that speaks to me.
Great. Before we end, is there anything you guys would like to add or talk about any further?
No, I think we've done really well. And if we consider this a series of talks, then this is a really beautiful opening.
Agreed. Well, thank you guys so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you. I guess what we could do is we could maybe just, as a little close, we could acknowledge that in Bwiti, when we say goodbye, we say, we are together.
We are together.
We are together.
Yeah, we are together.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you guys very much.
Thank you very much, Hamman.